In the autumn of 1884, Clara Bennett sat alone beside the window of a modest boarding house in St. Louis. Outside, rain tapped softly against the glass, turning the streets into rivers of gray mud and reflecting the dull glow of gas lamps. The room was small but tidy, filled with the familiar comfort she had gathered over the years: a bookshelf, a sewing basket, a rocking chair that creaked whenever she moved. Yet despite everything she owned, the room felt empty. At 29 years old, Clara had spent most of her life caring for other people. After her mother's death, she had helped raise her younger brothers. After they grew up and moved away, she devoted herself to teaching children at the local schoolhouse. The work was honest and respectable, but lately she had begun to feel as though her life had become a hallway with no doors. Each day looked exactly like the one before it. She would wake before sunrise, teach until afternoon, return to her room, read a book, go to sleep, repeat. The loneliness had arrived slowly. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It settled over her year by year until one evening she realized she could no longer remember the last time someone had truly asked how she was feeling. That rainy afternoon she unfolded a newspaper she had nearly thrown away. Most of the pages contained advertisements and political arguments she barely noticed. Then her eyes stopped on a small section near the bottom of the page. Western correspondence. Several ranchers and farmers were seeking wives willing to move west. Normally Clara would have ignored such things. But something made her keep reading. Most advertisements sounded alike. Men described their land, livestock, income, and expectations. Some requested beauty. Others requested obedience. A few seemed more interested in hiring a servant than finding a wife. Then she noticed one written differently. The advertisement read, Samuel Reed, age 36. Ranch owner in Montana Territory. Seeking a woman willing to build a life together. I value honesty more than perfection. Clara read the final sentence again. And again. I value honesty more than perfection. The words felt strangely personal. For years she had felt pressured to be perfect. Perfect daughter. Perfect teacher. Perfect lady. Perfect neighbor. But honest? Very few people ever asked for honesty. That evening she sat at her desk with a blank sheet of paper. For nearly an hour she stared at it. Finally she dipped her pen into the ink bottle and began writing. She did not pretend to be cheerful. She did not exaggerate her accomplishments. She simply told the truth. She explained that she was 29, that she taught school, that she sometimes worried she had waited too long to build a family, that she loved books, that she preferred meaningful conversations over crowded gatherings, that she was often afraid of change, and that despite her fears she had decided to write. When she finished, she folded the letter before doubt could change her mind. The next morning she mailed it. Then she waited. 10 days later, hundreds of miles away beneath Montana's endless sky, Samuel Reed opened the envelope. He was sitting at a rough wooden table inside his ranch house. The wind rattled the windows. His old horse Ranger stood outside the barn while cattle grazed across the distant fields. Samuel had received many responses. Most sounded rehearsed. Many told him what they thought he wanted to hear. Clara's letter was different. It sounded human. He read it twice. Then a third time. By sunset he had already begun writing his reply. Their correspondence continued through the winter. At first the letters were cautious. Then they became longer. More personal. More honest. Samuel described Montana. He wrote about sunrise spreading across the prairie like liquid gold. About storms powerful enough to shake entire buildings. About the silence of winter nights when snow covered everything. He admitted that loneliness had followed him for years. Not because people were absent. Because understanding was absent. Clara understood exactly what he meant. In return she described her life in St. Louis. The children she taught. The old bookstore she visited every Saturday. The memories she still carried from childhood. The dreams she rarely spoke aloud. With every letter the distance between them seemed to shrink. Months passed. Winter faded. Spring arrived. Their letters became the most important part of each week. Clara found herself smiling whenever she recognized Samuel's handwriting. Samuel often postponed ranch work just to finish reading her latest letter. Neither spoke openly of love. Yet both sensed something growing. Something neither had expected. One evening Samuel wrote, I cannot promise an easy life. The frontier rarely allows such promises. But I can promise honesty. I can promise respect. And if you choose to come west, I will do everything within my power to make this place feel like home." Clara read those words by candlelight. Then she sat quietly for several minutes. She knew the decision before she admitted it to herself. The following week she resigned from the schoolhouse, sold many of her belongings, packed her books into a trunk, and purchased a train ticket bound for Montana Territory. The night before departure she barely slept. Every possible fear entered her mind. What if Samuel was not who he claimed to be? What if she arrived and regretted everything? What if she failed? But another question refused to leave her thoughts. What if this was the opportunity she had been waiting for her entire life? Before dawn she carried her luggage to the station. Steam billowed from the locomotive. Passengers crowded the platform. Conductors shouted final instructions. Clara stood motionless for a moment. Behind her was the life she had always known. Ahead of her was uncertainty, adventure, possibility, fear, hope, perhaps all four at once. Taking a deep breath, she climbed aboard the train. As the wheels began rolling westward, the city slowly disappeared behind her. For the first time in years, Clara Bennett had no idea what tomorrow would bring. And strangely enough, that felt wonderful. 3 days later, Clara Bennett stepped down from the train onto a small wooden platform in Montana Territory and immediately felt as though she had arrived in another world. The air was different, cleaner, wider somehow. The sky seemed impossibly large, stretching from one horizon to the other without interruption. For a moment she simply stood there, clutching the handle of her suitcase as passengers moved around her. Then she saw him. Samuel Reed. He was taller than she had imagined from his letters. Broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, dressed in a weathered coat and worn hat. Yet what caught her attention was not his appearance. It was the expression on his face. He looked nervous, genuinely nervous, and somehow that eased her own fears immediately. For months she had worried about meeting a stranger. Now she realized he had been worrying too. Samuel removed his hat and stepped forward. "Miss Bennett?" Clara smiled softly. "Mr. Reed." For a second neither knew what to say. They had shared hundreds of pages of thoughts and stories. Yet standing face to face felt entirely different. Finally Samuel laughed quietly. "You look exactly how I imagined." Clara raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously practiced." "It isn't." His grin widened. "I spent the entire morning trying to think of something intelligent to say." The nervousness vanished from both of them. And just like that, the journey became real. Samuel loaded her luggage into a wagon waiting near the station. The ranch was nearly an hour away. As they traveled across the prairie, Clara found herself staring at the landscape in amazement. Rolling grasslands stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sun. The wind moved across the fields like waves across an ocean. There were no crowded streets. No factories. No endless rows of buildings. Only open space. Freedom. The ranch appeared on the horizon shortly before sunset. A sturdy wooden house stood near a red barn surrounded by fencing and grazing cattle. It wasn't luxurious. It wasn't grand. But it felt alive. Samuel noticed her studying it. "What do you think?" Clara considered the question carefully. "It looks honest." The answer made him smile. "Good." As they approached the barn, a large gray horse slowly walked toward them. The animal's muzzle was turning white with age. His movements were steady and confident. "That's Ranger," Samuel explained. "My oldest partner." The horse approached Clara, inspected her carefully, then nudged her shoulder with surprising gentleness. She laughed. "I think he's interviewing me." Samuel chuckled. "Then you're doing better than most visitors." That evening they shared supper in the ranch house. Conversation came easier than either expected. There were occasional moments of silence, but they felt comfortable rather than awkward. Like old friends learning how to occupy the same room after years of knowing each other only through letters. The following weeks passed quickly. Clara adapted to ranch life far better than she had anticipated. She helped organize supplies, repaired torn clothing, started a small vegetable garden beside the house. She even learned basic ranch work. Samuel taught her how to ride, how to identify weather patterns, how to spot problems among the cattle. At first neighboring ranchers were skeptical of the woman from the city. Most assumed she would leave within a month. Then they watched her work. They saw her repairing fences beneath the summer sun, helping injured animals, managing household responsibilities without complaint. Gradually their opinions changed. Respect replaced doubt. One evening an elderly rancher's wife pulled Clara aside during a community gathering. "You belong here," the woman said. The words stayed with Clara long after the event ended, because for the first time in years she believed they might be true. Summer arrived. Then came the storm. The sky darkened one afternoon with frightening speed. Massive clouds rolled across the prairie. The wind intensified. By sunset rain was falling sideways. Lightning illuminated the landscape every few seconds. Samuel immediately recognized the danger. Part of the cattle herd had wandered near a low area vulnerable to flooding. If they remained there overnight, many could die. Without hesitation he prepared to ride out. Clara watched him saddle Ranger. "You can't do this alone." "I have to try." "Then I'm coming." Samuel shook his head. "It's dangerous. So is losing the herd." For a moment neither moved. Then Samuel sighed. "I was afraid you'd say that." Together they rode into the storm. Rain soaked them within minutes. Wind battered them from every direction. The darkness made visibility almost impossible. Yet hour after hour they worked, guiding frightened cattle toward higher ground, closing damaged fencing, preventing panic from spreading through the herd. At one point Clara nearly lost her horse in deep mud. Samuel reached her just in time, grabbing her arm, steadying both rider and horse. For a brief second they looked at each other through the rain. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. By dawn the storm had passed. The cattle were safe. The ranch had survived. Exhausted and soaked, they returned home together. That morning, while drinking coffee at the kitchen table, Samuel found himself watching Clara as sunlight streamed through the window. She looked tired. Her hair was a mess. Mud stained her clothes. And he had never seen anyone more beautiful. Not because she was perfect, because she was real, strong, kind, courageous, everything he had hoped she might be, and more. Weeks later they were repairing a section of fence damaged by the storm. The afternoon was peaceful. Grass swayed gently in the breeze. Ranger grazed nearby. Samuel hammered a final nail into place, then unexpectedly stopped working. Clara noticed. "What is it?" Samuel stared at the prairie for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was unusually serious. "For most of my life I thought strength meant handling everything alone." Clara waited. "But these last months have taught me something." He turned toward her. "I'm happier when you're here." The wind moved softly through the grass. Neither looked away. Samuel took a slow breath. "I love you, Clara." Her heart nearly stopped. "I think I started falling in love with you somewhere between the first letter and the 100th. A smile appeared on her face. "Only somewhere?" His laugh broke the tension immediately. Then his expression softened again. "I don't have a fancy speech." "Good. I don't have a grand ring." "I don't care. But I do have a question." Samuel stepped closer. "Will you marry me?" Tears filled Clara's eyes. Not sad tears. The kind that appear when happiness arrives so suddenly it overwhelms you. "Yes." The answer came instantly. Without hesitation. Without doubt. "Yes, Samuel." They were married several weeks later beneath the enormous Montana sky. Friends from neighboring ranches attended. There were homemade decorations, simple food, laughter, music, and more happiness than either had thought possible. Years passed. The ranch prospered. The garden expanded. Children filled the house with noise and energy. Ranger eventually grew too old for ranch work and spent his final years peacefully grazing near the barn. Through every success and every hardship, Clara and Samuel faced life together. Not perfectly. No marriage is perfect. But honestly. The same honesty that had first connected them through a newspaper advertisement years before. Many decades later, Clara often sat on the porch during sunset and watched the prairie turn gold beneath the evening sky. Sometimes she thought about the frightened woman who had boarded a train in St. Louis with nothing but hope and a suitcase. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the risk, and she always arrived at the same conclusion. The greatest moments in life often begin with a decision that feels terrifying. One honest letter had carried her across the frontier. One brave choice had changed everything. And the man waiting at the end of that journey had turned out to be something far better than a dream. He had been real. And in the end, real love was worth every mile she had traveled to find it.